Hello and welcome to Summer Reading 2020, Planning in a Time of Pandemic. This webinar was actually recorded live on April 16th, but we had technical issues. So this is a recorded version without an audience. So planning, I know that sounds like a very dramatic title, but these are kind of dramatic times, so I thought it was appropriate. My name is Beth Yates, and I'm your presenter for today. I am the Children's Consultant in the Professional Development Office of the Indiana State Library, which means that I provide professional development opportunities as well as best practices and support to youth services librarians across the entire state. Those are my doggos down there. They are my coworkers right now because, like you guys, most of you, I am working from home. So that is the reason why we had technical issues and why I am re-recording this. The goals of this webinar are kind of threefold. They are, first of all, to address various aspects of summer reading, to kind of walk through all the things you need to think about when you are planning summer reading, and to talk about how they might be impacted this year and ways that you might work around those challenges. And then ultimately at the end, I'm going to share some resources that you can use for planning and for programs. I did want to give a quick thank you, a quick shout out to the Massachusetts Library System. They are the equivalent of the Indiana State Library, but of course in Massachusetts. And my colleagues over there also have done a summer reading webinar, and they were very kind enough to share their slides with me. So I've used a few of their slides throughout, so I wanted to say thanks. So right off the bat, I just wanted to be very clear and say it, or there's no getting around it. Summer reading is not going to look the same this year. It's just not. There's a lot of unknown circumstances surrounding this year. We don't really know if we will be in libraries yet, if patrons will want to come into libraries yet. We don't know what the future holds exactly. So we know it's not going to look the same, right? We know we're probably going to need to lean towards more virtual programming and reaching people not in the library building and not in large group programs. And ultimately, that is okay. It's not, we've never done a summer reading program during a time of pandemic before. And so it's going to look different, and it's okay that it looks different. I want to remind you guys that this is new to all of us. All the way from those of us at the state library, we've never dealt with this before, to you guys at the public libraries, and even to our patrons. This is a new situation for them also. There hasn't been a pandemic in the United States for over 100 years, I believe, or very close to 100 years. So, it's a brand new situation that we are all trying to figure out. So that kind of leads to expectations. I say what expectations because I think, first of all, we as librarians tend to have kind of high expectations for ourselves and for our programming, and we want to be everything for everybody, and we want to, this is a time in the summer to do wonderful, fun programs for our communities. But those expectations, we might need to temper them just a little bit. Because this summer is going to be different, like I've been saying. And then also our expectations are our patrons' expectations. Hopefully they will temper their expectations a little bit too. And I think you'll find that the majority of your patrons will also not really know what to expect, and they'll be very grateful for whatever program you guys are able to offer them. It is okay to not be okay right now. This is more of a personal note, but if you are struggling a little bit with this new situation, it's okay. That's all right. You need to hopefully take some time, be kind, give yourself some grace, cut yourself some slack, and realize that, like I said before, we're all in the same boat. We're all figuring this out together. So hopefully we have some good support networks to figure all this out. But ultimately, try not to compare yourself or your library to other libraries, because, every community is very different. Some very large libraries might have plenty of resources, plenty of staff, plenty of technology, and so they're able to jump in and provide a virtual program to their patrons without a lot of stress, or not as much stress. I'm sure they have stress too, for sure. But it might be a little bit easier for those who don't. And if you are from a smaller library, it's very likely that you might not have all of those resources. And so you don't need to feel like you have to do everything just because you see the neighbor down the road, that library is able to do a bunch of stuff. If you can't do that, it's okay. You do what you can with what you have. And I just like this meme. On a scale of 1 to 10, how focused are you? Banana. I think, we're all dealing with new circumstances, and one of those circumstances is that we are working from home. We are working oftentimes with our children, trying to do online schooling, our pets who are barking during our meetings, with our spouses or significant others who are also trying to work from home. Or, maybe you live alone, and so you're feeling very isolated right now. So all of these things can make it difficult to focus on work. So again, give yourself grace, cut yourself slack, and do what you can. So when we are talking about summer reading and this new situation, there are some things to consider. You may have heard the phrase the new normal thrown around quite a bit lately, because that is what we're going to have to get used to until there is a vaccine developed or they find some other way to effectively treat this virus. It's going to be hard for us to be in spaces with large groups, or even moderate groups, or even small groups. Your patrons may or may not, they might either be craving interaction, or they might be scared to come out and interact with people for a little while. You got to keep that in mind. The same thing, of course, goes with your work situation. Our libraries will be trying to reopen, but it's probably not going to be a cut and dried, all of a sudden you go back to the way life was before, or your library goes back to the way it operated before. There's going to be a slow process. It's a marathon, not a sprint. A slow process of figuring out what this is going to look like, what we can do slowly but surely. So, anybody overwhelmed? If you are, it's completely understandable. There is a lot to think about. It's a real mind shift to go from, the way we've always done things into this new world where we're just not going to be able to operate the same way. So when you're thinking, you're overwhelmed, and you're trying to think your way through this process, I recommend that you start thinking about your goals for summer reading for your particular library. And these might be, well, first of all, why do we do summer reading? That is the big question that your library has to ask. And maybe you've asked this in the past and you have a very clear definition for your library. And if you do have a very clear definition, you need to look at that and say, okay, does this still apply in this new situation, or do we need to tweak it? Same thing goes if you've never come up with one, then you'll really want to think hard about why you're doing summer reading and what your goals are. And here are just a few sample goals. I'm not going to read them all out to you, but, of course, encouraging reading, encouraging a positive attitude towards books. And reading is kind of a traditional one, encouraging library use, creating a positive image of your library. All of these things are very valid reasons for summer reading. And these are examples that I got out of the Collaborative Summer Library Program manual. So FYI, if you don't have the manual at home with you, you can get to it online. Go to cslpreads.org and you can log in and go to the online manual. If you need help finding that, just let me know. But again, you really have to reconsider your goals, even if you already have them, to look at your community right now and decide, is what you need to do different than what you've done before? What does that look like for kids versus teens versus adults? For instance, if we're looking into the near future and what our community is going to need, there's an economic downturn coming, right? It's already started a little bit. There's lots and lots of unemployed people. So the library has traditionally played a role in assisting with that. So what can the library do, and can it be incorporated into your summer reading program at all? That's something that you and your library will have to look at and try to answer. Same thing with kids. Achievement gaps tend to be there anyway, but now we've got everyone trying to learn from home. Some can do that more easily than others. Some are more advantaged than others. So that gap is probably going to be even wider. So in what ways might you be able to help with that in your community? So as we start to talk about goals and we start to walk through all the different aspects of summer reading, which is what we're going to do next, I wanted to let you know that I have come up with what I'm calling just a summer reading planning tool. It's a very basic document, and it just kind of walks you through the different aspects and some of the different options. I just kind of lay out some of the most common options for you, and you and your staff can look at them and consider, what do we want to do? What are some of the options? Or maybe these aren't what you want to do at all, but at least you've got something to get started. This document is going to be available since this webinar is being recorded. It will be available underneath the recording on the archived webinar page where this webinar is posted. But as we go through all these, I do just want to remind you that virtual is fantastic. It can be a wonderful way to reach your patrons, and that includes, doing virtual programming, using Facebook a lot, using some sort of electronic tracking system. Those are all awesome. But how will you reach the patrons in your community without internet or even without cellular access? Or, there's going to be a lot of families who can't even afford data for their cell phone if they do have a cell phone and cell phone access. So just kind of being aware of that and deciding to what level your library is going to try to reach out to those folks and get them involved, because they are probably families that really need the library's assistance and services. All right, so now we're going to, as I said, we're going to kind of walk through all the different aspects when you are trying to plan a summer reading program that you need to consider. So the first one is overall structure. And by overall structure, I mean the length and when you're going to start, like the start and the end dates, right? So some things to consider. Could you potentially start your program a little bit later in the year than you normally would? So if you're not ready to go on June 1st, or you feel like you're too overwhelmed to get started right on June 1st, could you start June 15th or maybe July 1st? Going along with that, if you're going to start later, could you shorten your program maybe? Maybe you just want to do a 4-week program this year instead of a 6 to 8 week program, which is kind of the more traditional length of summer reading. You could even consider pushing it back and just doing a fall reading program. Now, the one problem with that is that if you're looking at your goals and one of your goals is to combat summer slide or to help those kids who are experiencing an even greater achievement gap because they've been homeschooling, or not really homeschooling, but schooling at home, then moving it to the fall might not be the best way to assist those kids. But, again, if your library needs to do that because that's the way it will work out easiest for you, then that is an option. This is a point where I like to just bring up the Indiana State Standards and say that the 6-week program is what we normally require for the standards. And it could be, they dropped the word summer from it in the state standards a few years ago to make it easier for schools and communities with balanced calendars. And they don't have to be, so it can be any time during the year, and they don't have to be consecutive weeks either. So you could do 2 weeks in the spring, 2 weeks in summer, 2 weeks in fall, or something to that effect. But in addition to those flexibilities, just a heads up that, and this is something your directors will be more worried about, and they will know about these sorts of things. So don't stress about them, but I'm just saying this so that you guys are aware that waivers will be given. So if you don't feel like you can do a full 6-week summer reading program, you can't make that work, you need to shorten it or do something a little different, you're in the clear. Everything's okay. All right. Again, you don't have to, I don't think you have to do anything for that. Your directors, when they fill out your annual reports, are the ones who will be filling that part out. But just wanted to give you guys a heads up that there's some flexibility there. Now, I would encourage you guys to do something for summer reading if you possibly can. The reason for that is that I think this is a really great time for us to remind our communities that we are here, that yes, we had to close our doors for a little while, but we are still working for them, that we provide wonderful services, that families miss us, and that we still want to do something for them if we can. Now, that being said, again, if you are the only librarian at a small library and there is just no way that you can make summer reading work, you don't have the technology in your town, the Wi-Fi, whatever you need, then, do what you have to do. The next thing you kind of need to think about is your requirements and how you will track those requirements. So when I say requirements, I mean for summer reading, which is usually a multiple week kind of ongoing program, right? Usually the library says, we are going to say that you can earn prizes or the right to vote or a raffle entry. You can earn those things if you meet certain requirements. So you need to read for 5 hours and then you get a prize, or you need to read or do some activities for a total of, I don't know, or you need to do like 50 pages and then you get a prize. Whatever your requirements are, that's what the library will set. So I'm going to say that this year, simplify your requirements, you guys. I used to work at a library where we had some very complicated requirements. We said that different books were worth different numbers of points, and then you had to count up all those points and figure out, how many, and then once they got to a certain level, they could get prizes. And that was very complicated, both for the patrons and for the library workers. So this is not the summer to do something like that. If you can, cut it back and just say, something like, you need to read a total of 15 hours this summer, or you need to read a certain number of pages this summer. However you want to do it, something simple, easy, nothing complicated. I do also want to point out this statistics are going to go down this summer. Just expect it. Participation is not going to be what it normally is, but just remember that's going to be the case across the board. And not just even in libraries. That's going to be the case in theaters, in sporting events, in a lot of other areas. So we're not the only ones. So don't stress too much about statistics this summer. Okay, guys? Now, when it comes to tracking things like minutes, pages, hours, however you want to do it, there are several paid services that some libraries like. Now, these are some of the more popular ones that you see on the screen here. I will give you a quick heads up that I think some of them are maybe no longer accepting new libraries because they had such an influx a couple weeks ago, a month ago, when this first started. For instance, Beanstack, I think, wanted people to sign up by April 15th. So I'm not sure if they're still accepting people or libraries. However, if you want to push your program back and start later in June or in July, there's a chance they might work with you. So, all you can do is talk to them. There are a couple free services you could also check out. One of them, a director told me about, she said it was a little clunky but free, is Engaged Patrons. And this one is free to public libraries that are receiving less than $1 million per year in total income as reported to the IMLS. And again, your directors will know if this is the case, but I believe there's also a spot on their website where you can type in your information and they will check and see if you're eligible for that. So that was a free service. I would think even if you can't do it for free, that you might get to do it for not, I don't think it's super expensive, is what I'm trying to say. And then there's also Google Forms. Now, it has been pointed out to me that Google Forms has some possible security issues. It's not the most secure way to do it, but Google Forms or SurveyMonkey, any of those sorts of things you can use to collect registration information for your patrons, and then you can save it into a spreadsheet so that you have, if you want to keep track of how many people are participating, you can do it that way without too much trouble. Or this year, you could just not require registration. Those numbers are really not that important, but I mean, they can be useful for sure in that if you want to show how many people your library has reached, then it's a great way to do that. You know, we reached this many families, this many people this summer. But certainly these stats are not going to be comparable to last year's stats or next year's stats, probably. So for that reason, it's not as necessary. Now, there are ways you can keep track of registration or how many people are participating without requiring everyone to sign up. And we'll talk about those in a minute. I did want to point out, I also have a resource sheet that I have created. This one will also be on the page on the Indiana State Library's archived webinar page, where you can find this webinar that you're watching right now. Underneath that will be these links. So I have linked to all of those most popular electronic tracking, as well as I linked to an article on how to use Google Forms for summer reading. It's in the Librarian versus Storytime blog, and like I said, I linked to that article for you. Now, these are some ideas, and several of these you could still, you could do things without keeping track of, you know, it lets you keep track of how many people are participating without having to keep track of everyone's name and phone number, etc. So one of them is you could use postcards for registration and or tracking. And when I say postcards, that could be postcards, it could be a game board, it could be a bingo board, it could be any sort of way for people to kind of keep track of what they're reading or how much they're reading, but it's a physical paper form of some sort. And a library in Texas is using postcards, and they're putting them in like grocery stores and other service points that are still open, that people are going to. They're being collected in boxes there, and then they get picked up like once a week, and then the librarians can take them home and put them into whatever system they're using to track. You could also potentially take registrations over the phone, especially if you're able to get into the library and work from the library, but maybe patrons are not allowed in yet, or you're not allowing a lot of patrons in, and so you could set up a phone line and register people that way. You can partner with schools to distribute the paper logs of some sort. Again, the game boards, the bingo boards, book logs, and you know, oftentimes, especially right now, many school districts are distributing meals in some way, either delivering them or offering pickup for meals. And so if that is still happening, then you could work with them maybe. Also, you could distribute those logs or game cards via local newspapers. Maybe if you're from a small community with a small utility of some sort, a local utility, they might be willing to include a log in their utility bill. Lots of different things to consider. And so when I was saying that you could, you know, keep track without requiring actual registration, you could have people come turn these cards in and get their prizes. You know, we'll discuss ways to do that later. But when they're doing that, then you can keep track of how many of those cards you get back, and that's how you know what the participation is, as opposed to recording everyone's name. Let's move on to presenters and programs. And really simply for presenters, I just say talk to them. If you are ready, if you were planning ahead and you already have presenters hired, that's great. I recommend you reach out to them ASAP and see what they're planning to do to offer their program virtually. It's possible that they are canceling, but the summers are really their primary source of income many times. They are small businesses too. So they will probably be very motivated to find a way to work with your library to offer that program virtually, be it through Facebook Live, Facebook event, or maybe Zoom or something similar to Zoom if you don't want to use Zoom. So definitely talk to them, reach out to them, and see what you can work out. As far as programs go, I really, really recommend that you plan on cutting back on what you normally offer. I know we used to do several things almost every day of the week at my old library, and I think it makes a lot of sense, especially if you'd normally do a lot of in-person programs for school age, for teen, for children, for adult, whatever, that you maybe cut that back to half or even less. Because when you're trying to record something and then figure out the logistics of posting and spreading the word about it and all that, that adds extra workload on top of just doing the program itself. But you can kind of fill in some of the blanks where you would do traditional virtual programming with some other things. This is a good opportunity to suggest different activities in your communities. And you can suggest these things just by posting them on Facebook or whatever social media you guys use. If your community has a story walk, you could maybe try to change that out more often. If you don't have one at all, just Google story walk and you'll come across some great FAQ websites that kind of walk you through how to do that. Organizing or suggesting scavenger hunts in people's neighborhoods or backyards, or even on the library's website. You could have them scavenger hunt for certain books or certain databases. Encouraging random acts of kindness. No contact ones, of course, would be preferable. But this is a great time for us to be kind to our neighbors. Organizing some sort of video or art contest, or even just submissions. You could post things in library windows. You could post things on Facebook. Recipe exchanges are easily done online. And citizen scientist, there's also, I believe, citizen archivist or archivist. That is an actual national program. If you Google citizen scientist, you'll come up with the website. And it explains it. But it's projects like keeping track of the number of fireflies you see at a certain time in your backyard for a certain amount of time. So that's just one example of the sort of project. And then you report those numbers. And then that way they can kind of track something on a national level that they wouldn't otherwise have the resources to do. If you want to offer some activities that are accessible even to people without the internet, there are a few things that you could offer. You could try putting together kits, paper kits, or even craft kits. I'll give you an example of just kind of a simple paper kit here in just a minute. But also print up some challenge sheets that you can have available. Maybe they go out with meals that are distributed from the high schools, or maybe they're made available other places where teens might gather, or even but then you can, suggest maybe a baking challenge, a building challenge, creating challenge. Learn a skill, teach a skill is where you challenge someone to learn something. So you challenge them maybe to learn to play the guitar or learn to juggle, and then teach somebody else. So obviously if you can do this on the internet, it's easier. But if they can't, then they could teach a parent or a sibling perhaps. And then finally, for the little ones, you could have early literacy calendars, which a lot of you already do, but this is a great time to utilize them and make them available for your patrons. Maybe you put them in grocery stores and people pick them up. And each day of the month, you have a different early literacy activity that a parent and child can do together. So for instance, sing your ABCs, or read a library ebook together, or, that sort of thing. It encourages talking, singing, reading, writing, and playing. And the bingo sheets idea for preschoolers is very similar. So you just it's a grid with different early literacy activities, and once they complete like 5 in a row, then maybe they are eligible for a prize. You could do bingo sheets with older kids too, though. So here's that example of a kit. This one was put together by Jefferson County, which is down in Madison and Hanover. Jefferson County works with their Boys and Girls Club, and the Boys and Girls Club distributes meals each week, and they are taking the packets that Jefferson County puts together, and they are distributing those with their meals. So this one has some jokes. They started out with some jokes, and then they have crafts and activities. So the craft for this one, because it was around Easter, is an origami bunny. And the activity is a game of memory using Easter eggs. So I know we certainly have not even started to cover the possibilities with all the programs you could potentially do virtually. So I am really happy to say that at one of the Indiana Library Federation Youth Services networking chats that we had this past week, I created this blank document and said, hey guys, put your program ideas in here. It's a Google document that anybody can contribute to, preferably here in Indiana. And so this document, this Google document, is linked to from the resource sheet that I mentioned earlier. So the resource sheet will be available, again, linked on the archived webinar page where you found this webinar. And then on that resource sheet is linked to this virtual programming idea sheet. Also, an FYI that the Collaborative Summer Library Program is working on their own program idea list. They are taking ideas from the CSLP manual for this year and past years, and they are making those or tweaking those so that they will work virtually. And they hope to have that out no later than beginning like May 1st. I'm hoping it's even sooner, but as soon as it's available, I will send it out on the Indiana listservs and make sure everyone is aware. One quick side note about Facebook events. I picked up some best practices from another webinar that I attended. They suggest that you come up with a schedule, just like you would have a schedule for your in-person programs most of the time. So especially things like preschool story time tend to be the same day and time every week. So if you can make it, maybe it's not every week, maybe it's every 2 weeks, whatever you feel will work for you, but as long as it's somewhat consistent, that's great for your patrons. Try to create a Facebook event within your library's Facebook page. So there's a tab that says events, and then you can create a new event, and you can put your information about your program in there, and then you advertise it, and your patrons can say that they are quote unquote going, and then they'll receive notifications, which is really great in reminding them that it's going to happen, right? I said already you need to share the information about the event, so obviously you'll do that on your library's timeline. But take a few minutes and look around, think about who else in your community might have a Facebook page where you could share this information. So for sure, check out your school Facebook pages. Maybe there's a mom's group that you could share it to. Some other organizations in your community or businesses might also be willing to work with you and let you post those on their pages. All right, let's talk about incentives and partnerships real quick. Incentives, first of all, are anything, so it's a prize of some sort, usually, right? It's something, whatever you can do or give away that will encourage people to read or do whatever activities you're asking them to do. So, prizes. If you have already ordered physical prizes like trinkets, books, things like that, consider, could you push back when they're able to pick up those prizes? Maybe they can earn them through the summer, but they can't pick them up until August. Or maybe you just straight up extend the pickup time and maybe they can pick them up through the end of the year. If you're in a community where the participation would allow this financially, maybe you can mail the prizes, or you could even potentially deliver them if you're in a small enough community and that sort of thing would be okay with everyone. Of course, curbside pickup might be a great option by the time summer rolls around. We might be back in our buildings and we might be offering curbside pickup. I think this will vary from library to library, but if your library is doing curbside pickup, there's no reason why people couldn't pick up their prizes along with their books. Other ideas for prizes, especially touchless prizes, e-gift cards is a really great one, especially if you can get them for local businesses, because local businesses really need your support right now. So it's kind of a really great symbiotic relationship. We might not be able to ask them to donate things this year. Maybe it's our turn to support them if we can afford to. Again, I realize that might not be possible. Some alternatives, if you are pinched for money, you could try digital badges. They're just these, there's pictures of them here, but they're these cute little digital icons that you can hand out to people via email or some other digital method. Maybe you send them through social media. And a lot of the electronic tracking programs, or not a lot, but some of them do offer digital badging as one of their things that they just already do. But you could also create your own too, with some design software. You could vote as a community and take whatever money you do have and say that you're going to spend that money on something that your community votes on. So it could be that you're going to donate that money to a local charity, a humane society, something like that, but they get to vote on which one that you're going to give the money to. You could also do something like a collection for the library. So, you have this small chunk of money and you're going to spend it on starting a video game collection, or maybe you're going to add more movies to your Hoopla account. So they get to vote on which thing you're going to start or build. And then finally, just having kind of one big general community reading goal is always an option. And the easiest way to do that would be to say that if the community as a whole checks out a certain number of books, ebooks, audiobooks, or whatever other materials you want to include, then you'll do some big thing, and maybe you videotape it and show it. So maybe a librarian says she will dye her hair a wacky color or colors. Maybe you allow some of the librarians get slimed. Their kids slime them in their backyard or spray them with water, or something silly like that maybe some kids would be entertained by. Or maybe you get a local teacher or a local politician or somebody people will know, maybe your mayor or somebody like that. I just wanted to mention also, I have one more resource for you that I'll be sharing that will be linked under this webinar on the archive webinar page, and that is about books, because books is another great prize that a lot of you already use. And this is a list of sources of discounted and free books, and it was compiled by the Library of Idaho, and they shared it with me. So I am sharing it with you guys if you need places to look. I just want to remind you all that partnerships are a wonderful thing, and right now partnerships are beneficial. I mean, we don't need to be reinventing the wheel here, right? This is not a time when we need to expend more effort. So look around, see if anybody's doing something you can piggyback on or help with. Again, I mentioned schools and meal distribution, things like that. But also look around and see where there might be gaps in services in your community, and see if the library might be able to fill some of those gaps. And I have some ideas there at the bottom. So just a really quick recap of the resources that I will be sharing that you will be able to get at the bottom of the archive webinar page where this is posted. The summer reading planning tool that walks you through the different aspects of summer reading. The summer reading pandemic planning resources sheet, And from there, you can link to the collaborative list of virtual program ideas by Indiana librarians. And then finally, that sources of discounted or free books sheet. So that is all I have for you guys today. I hope that this webinar was beneficial to you, and I wish you all the best with your summer planning. Please, if you're an Indiana librarian, feel free to reach out to me at byates@library.in.gov. That's my email address right on that screen. And if you need an LEU certificate for attending this, you will follow the policies for watching recorded webinars, which you can find on the Indiana State Library's page, but which in short are that you will have to ask an administrative person at your library or an HR person to create that certificate for you, because they will be verifying that you watched the webinar. So with that, I wish you all the best and have a great summer.